Hi, Pamela. Hi, Kyle. Thanks for coming. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us for today's talk on Kyle Warner's Alternative Reflection with Pamela Sneed. My name is Annette Her. I am the curator and the host of Backyard Ghost, and I really welcome these two amazing artists for this curated talk. I'm gonna read Pamela's bio so we can introduce. Okay, Pamela Sneed is a New York-based poet, writer, performer, and visual artist, author of Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery, Kong and Other Works, Sweet Dreams and Two Chaplets, Gift by Belladonna, and Black Panther. She has been featured in the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, Hyperallergic, and the cover of New York Magazine. She is online faculty in SAIC's low-res MFA teaching human rights and writing art, and has also been a visiting artist at SAIC in the program for 5 consecutive years. In 2020, she was the commencement speaker for the low-res MFA program at SAIC. She also teaches new genres in Columbia University's School of the Arts. She has performed at the Whitney Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Poetry Project, MCA, the Highline New Museum, MoMA, Broad Museum, and the Toronto Biennial. Her visual poetry work is currently on view at Whitman Walker. She delivered the closing keynote for the Artists, Designers, Citizens Conference, a North American component of the Venice Biennial at SAIC. She appears in Nikki Giovanni's The 100 Best African American Poems. In 2018, she was nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes in poetry. She is widely published in journals such as the Brooklyn Rail, Art Forum Magazine, and the Paris Review. She is the author of a poetry and prose manuscript, Funeral Diva, published by City Lights in October 2020, featured in the New York Times and Publishers Weekly. In upcoming months, she is already showing her visual work on the Hook website, curated by Eric Shiner. She appears with Ariza White in a talk sponsored by Cave Canem and NYU Writing Program. Also, during March, she hosts a radio talk show for Howl Gallery and is a panelist for an upcoming show with the Ford Foundation Disposable Bodies.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pamela.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Hi, Kyle.
And Kyle Warner is a New York-based artist who lives and works in Manhattan. He is currently attending the School of the Visual Arts, working towards a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography with honors, and is expected to graduate in 2023. Yay! Thank you so much, both, to being here. I'm super excited about today's talk, and we will be discussing a lot of different aspects of Kyle's work and where he's at, where he's going, and we'll just look into every single detail of this current exhibition. So, where should we start?
Well, first of all, do you want to describe the work and maybe talk about like your favorite one and what your inspiration is?
I don't know if I necessarily have a favorite to say. I think I like the entire body of work as it is, like being shown with one another, and I think that's very important for them to be seen with one another instead of solitarily. I believe that when it comes to thinking about the work, it's a way for me to understand where I've come from, because if I want to move forward in my life and to move forward through history, I need to at least have a strong grounding and where I came from. So a lot of the work has to do with
Hey, wow!
It's okay.
I'll just wait for the fire truck to go by. So as I was saying before the fire truck interrupted, that I feel that I need to have a grounding in my history, whether it is immediate family history, whether it is cultural history, to understand who I am, who I came from, what different aspects kind of created me to
Mm.
be me in this idea of I'm trying to locate myself and where I came from in space and time.
Where did you come from?
So my family is from the Caribbean. My dad's side of the family is from St. Kitts. He immigrated here in the 80s, I believe, and my mom's side of the family is from Trinidad and Pamela, and they've been here since the 50s.
Wow.
And a lot of this work is trying to, in a sense, look at those different stories of Trinidad, of St. Kitts, as well as other islands,
Mm.
and how does that idea of slavery, colonialism, and all that goes along with that create who I am today?
So how is that represented then? Because most of the works are abstract, right? So how do you represent your family, or like what, you know?
I think it's not about, because being representational, I don't think is a good way to be represented. So if I were to put a figure to represent what I am trying to show, it
Mhm.
doesn't work, because when I'm looking at these narratives, it's not a single straight timeline. It's not a singular moment in time.
Mm.
So when I see this as almost the process and the manifestation of of the narrative coming together. So by taking different scraps of fabric and paper and paint and putting that together, that process of taking individual parts, whether they were a finished product or they were raw material, to create this whole, I think that is the way that I'm trying to come to representing these narratives.
And so would you consider these works to be Afrocentric? Like some of them I identify as like some kind of cloth that's like not kente, but like some kind of cloth that's, attached to African Americans or Africans in the diaspora. Like this, there's a red piece here in yellow, and it reminds me of the Maasai tribe in Africa, that particular kind of red. So yeah, do you consider your works to be Afrocentric?
I wouldn't say they're Afrocentric. I think they are conscious of that, because
Mm-hmm.
I have to be conscious if I'm looking back, where did I come from? I'm from this lineage of coming from Africa via the slave trade
Mm-hmm.
to the Caribbean. So I
Mm-hmm.
felt that it was important to have different textiles that would speak to that and would acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Going forward, then there's also certain textiles that have a more tropical feel to them, whether it's the flowers, whether it's the colors on them, whether it's different animals depicted on them. I feel as though I'm trying to combine them, because in my head there's three locations where it's Africa, the Caribbean, and now New York,
Mm-hmm.
where the
Yeah.
3 points,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to be able to tie them all together,
Mm-hmm.
and also be representative of all the other influences outside of just those three locations.
Did anyone in your family work with textiles?
So my mother used to travel for work. So she would be in India and
Mm-hmm.
Amsterdam and China, and she was buying textiles for the company she worked for. And while she was over there, she would always amass, like, oh, she would see this fabric, and she would want to use it for a dress. Over the years, life happens. She wasn't able to do a lot of it, so I kind of came into this large cohort of fabric. And it wasn't just my mother, my grandmother was also a seamstress.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, between these two women, these piles and piles and piles of fabrics that were sitting there
Mm-hmm.
with no one else with really no one really to touch them. And I felt that that was a part of me also, to say that that was part of their history, to women I look up to and I appreciate. I felt that incorporating that into the work was necessary.
Mm.
And then going further, where textiles also came from, I had a teacher who had these crates of fabric that were gifted to her, that it's another, she said, hey, you can use this in a class, that never got used. And then I came along and started to use that. So I think there's this almost history of me using textiles comes from important women in my life
Mm-hmm.
who have been very influential on me and have basically, based off of them holding on to these materials, have allowed me to practice what I'm doing right now.
Have you had any conflict in terms of like gender, in the sense of like women being traditionally, well, not really, but have working in fabrics and textile and weaving and stuff like that, and so you as a young man picking up that tradition, was there any conflict or anything?
I
No.
don't think so. No,
Mhm.
everyone in my family, like, I don't really think it was like a conflict. It's more so like supported also,
That's
where
great.
my mom, when we were younger, intended to teach us to learn how to sew and work with fabrics. So it was more supported than a conflict. Why are you taking this up and that, and those more heteronormative functions.
Oh, that's great. You know, it's interesting because I'm looking at this blue piece here, which I think is just spectacular. And I was thinking about like there's a little bit of like Afrofuturism too, in the sense that like it feels intergalactic, you know, and like these blues and they feel like the sky and all these different fabrics. So I'm thinking about like Afrofuturism, and then I'm also thinking about the world and like pregnancy, you know, and like because like the stomach is out and it feels like a stomach, and so I wonder in a way if you're like giving birth to yourself in some way in this particular exhibition.
I think so. When I first had made that piece, I had was researching, and there was a book that I was intending to read, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there was a book I was intending to read, and was talking about the birth of the slave society in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea, and this specifically in Barbados, and that idea I kind of ran with because had grown up on stories of hearing, oh, Barbados rose out of the sea, Barbados, like this beautiful place, and I was thinking about all these different things going into it. So this idea of pregnancy, and I was maternity, I was an undertone that I was thinking about.
Mm.
It wasn't necessarily the purpose, but I think working through it, it came to being. The Afrofuturism one, I wasn't too much thinking about though. Um, I I can see how someone could get there, but I didn't.
Well, it just feels
Yeah,
planetary. I mean, I'm
yeah.
feeling like, you know, Octavia Butler, you know, I'm feeling like the
Mhm.
stars and stuff like that. And so who are some contemporary influences of yours?
I think one of the biggest influences that I have for this whole process comes from Jacqueline.
Mm.
I think something about him as a person, and reading the Notes from the Woodshed and getting like a sense of like his personality and how he worked to make his own process was very influential for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that when I'm going to make my own work, it needs to be uniquely me. It needs to be my own process. It can't just be painting in a way how other people have painted. It can't be weaving in the way that other people have weaved before. I need to be taking different materials and using it in similar ways but different ways. So when I'm looking at Jack Whitten's work, and I think about like the two process where he was doing the slab painting, and he would use the as he called the developer, which was like a big tool to make these paintings in one single stroke,
Mm-hmm.
and then moving further where he was laying down slabs of acrylic and then breaking them up to then tile them back onto those works. I was that idea of, I think, creating your own process, but especially that secondary where he was collaging back on, taking fragments from something else, was really influential going forward. It's like, this is what I need to be doing in my own way because I'm pulling from different fragments.
And, I just saw Grief and Grievance at the New Museum, and actually his piece is one of my favorites. You know, it's like the tin foil and like the layers, and I mean, I can't do it justice in terms of talking about it, but you know, it's really beautiful. So he's very spectacular. And then I think about Mark Bradford when you talk about that process of like abstraction and taking things and adding things and like, yeah. Do you like Bradford's work?
I think so too. He's another like. I think a lot of the abstract artists that I have a great appreciation for comes not necessarily from their style of abstraction, because I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Mark Bradford's style. When I see it, I'm always blown away. But there's something that I sometimes miss. But I have a real appreciation for the process and why he's doing that. Where for him, when you look at it, he was using end papers where he graduated from grad school and had all this debt, and you can't go afford to go buy gallons of paint to make these big pieces. So what do you use?
Right.
The end papers.
Right.
For me, it was using piles and piles of fabric that I had from home, where I don't have the money to necessarily go buy gallons and gallons of paint to try to mix, and I didn't have the space. So using what was already there and what was also already very familiar to me made sense to just go into. So that was like another person I was really resonating with. And then I always like look around at like other contemporary artists that or who are younger. So I was looking at Patrick Alston, and I think the use of, I guess, thinking about titles as well, and more having the title try to have the energy of the piece as it were, as you would say, instead of representing it, the title and the artwork kind of create a feeling that
it's like poetry.
Yeah,
I'm a poet. So what is the blue piece titled?
So the blue piece is titled Cruel Paradise. So thinking about the islands, thinking about the idea of cruelty that exists in the past, and in a way it still exists in the Caribbean now, going forward. Yeah.
And then I noticed that that the primary colors are pretty dominant, right? So is that a specific choice, or that just kind of happened? Like, how do you choose your palette?
A lot of it comes from, I think, what I have to work with. I do tend to look at images of and pull from like different books that have color palettes from the Caribbean and using of house colors. So like in a lot of newer work, it follows that a little bit more. This is more so kind of what I had, and I'm still trying to stick to that idea of pulling from family and using family's materials in my work, instead of going out and buying this specific one and this specific one to like, because then in my head that just feels fake. I'm faking the history versus using what's there to make the history and try to retell it for myself.
Well, it's funny. I'm going to interject because I'm wearing this like bright pink, sweater. And basically, I got it in Mexico. I was just in Cancun, by the Caribbean Sea. And then funny enough, like, you don't find colors like this in like New York. And I was like, and I brought this like really bright pink. And then I brought this like really bright orange and another bright blue. And people were like, "Wow, I really love your color." And I didn't know if like people were going to like laugh at me or whatever. But I just was like, I love like Mexico's colors, like they just do it up. Like, everybody on the beach, had like a purple bathing suit or a pink bathing suit. Like, it's not like this, in New York, it's like very dark and,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I bought this sweater and I was like, it reminds me of Mexico, how they do color.
Yeah.
And then tell me about this piece that's next to the blue piece. That, I mean, again, there's like a hole, and it makes me think of like the galaxy. And then there's some crisscross, like kind of like fabric, and I think about like sky, and I don't know. Just tell me about that piece.
Well, when I think about it, it's towards the end of those. That was the newest piece in the series,
Mhm.
and it started to get from just telling narratives to also trying to figure out who I am and the difference between being what I'm trying to describe and becoming that.
Mhm.
And in that process of becoming the being that I'm trying to explore as a member of the African diaspora and the Caribbean diaspora, and feeling that one part has what the other part is lacking, where there is a physical hole I feel in my memory, in my
Yeah.
sensibility, where the other one is whole but
Mhm.
maybe flatter, and balancing between the two.
Mhm. And then there's something interesting, like, so then you've chosen like the square, right? So
Mhm.
primarily you're working with squares, and then you have that like round shaped, like within it could be a gourd. And then I was just thinking about masks, like there's a way that like if there were eyes or if there was a mouth, like, that there would be some kind of like mask quality to
Mhm.
to these pieces. Have you thought about that?
I haven't really thought about like the mass quality.
Mm-hmm.
I did think about the idea of like the square, and I think there's a certain attractiveness that I have towards squares. And as a teacher, I had said like when the aspect ratio is a little off and you have a chubby square,
Mm-hmm.
those two I think are very easy shapes to work with, to
Mm-hmm.
build off of into the future. I think they allow me to say whatever I want versus when I changed it up and I was to say, let's say, work with with an aspect ratio of 1:2.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of changes the dialogue, and I have to work towards the shape instead of the shape working for me.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I was thinking so. So how? So you're a mixed media person, textile person. You're working with diaspora. You're working with history. You're working with your own family archive. So, so what was the question? I just had. I had the flu shot. So um, how has your work been received in terms of like you're in school, you're at SBA. Like what kind of feedback or response have you gotten to your work?
When the few times that I show it to like professors, because I'm not majoring in this, I'm majoring in photography and video. So most of this work, maybe except for the two of them that have a photographic element,
Mm-hmm.
would not be shown in a class. So
Mm-hmm.
most of my peers don't see it unless they follow me on social media.
Mm-hmm.
The the professors that have seen it are blown away and are very impressed by the work, and they often lead to really good dialogues about what's going on. And as a couple of professors say, it's a good balance to have where you're not solely one type of media minded, and it
Mm-hmm.
allows you to see different issues from multiple points of view.
Mm-hmm.
And you might learn this saying, oh, if you want to talk about one thing, your mixed media practice will speak to it a lot better than, say, if you were to try to document it photographically or try to make a video piece about it.
Right. And so do you aspire to unify all these practices? I mean, because I write and then also, make visual art, and people always like pressure me to kind of like put writing in my visual art.
Mm-hmm.
So like do you feel pressured to kind of unify any of them?
No,
No.
not really. And I think because I do feel like the pressure will come eventually.
Hmm.
I really want to be resilient and kind of keep them separated because I feel that each practice is for a certain thing. I think that the undertones of the work
Hmm.
may be similar, where they all might be talking about family and they're all talking about history and culture and trying to figure out identity.
Hmm.
I don't think they speak the same way about certain things, where I think the more abstract pieces are meant to be more conceptual and really
Hmm.
to have you think about what shape am I making, what are how the colors interacting in relation to the title,
Hmm.
and really create an experience that I want the viewer to think more about, versus if I'm doing more video or I'm doing more photographic work, I I'm making it a little bit easier because it's a language that it's a lot easier for other people to understand. And I keeping it separate allows me to do different things, different ways. I don't want to like combine the two based out of pressure. These are two distinctly different parts of me. So to say, oh, I'm all one thing would be a lie again. I'm trying to be as truthful as possible. I see the world in many different ways, so I have to show it many different ways.
So will you go around and tell me the titles of each piece, since titling is like a big thing?
Okay, so we'll start over here with this yellow one. So this one is called The Last Stop, #2 / Brian Fernandez, Australian Calypso. Do you want me to explain the titles as well? Or
Yeah, sure.
So that piece is this idea of sugarcane and the idea of being brought to the Americas for the production of sugarcane, specifically on the island of St. Kitts, where my dad is from, and the cease of production, as well as where that was a lot of slaves' last stop, where you went from Africa and then you ended up there, and many people died there. So that was that piece, and then it also has that second quality because when I think about calypso music, there's a comedic effect to it. It's not, you can talk about difficult subjects, but you can laugh at the stories that are being told. And when I was making the piece and I was showing a friend, he was always joking about, oh, this looks like it's from Australia, or something about it gave him an Australian aesthetic. And I was like, what did you, he was just giving me a hard time. I said, you know what, fine, I'm gonna name this after you in honor of that and going forward. The yellow and red one, circle one to the next, is called, I can't remember my title, but I believe it's called I Don't Know and I Never Will. And kind of when I was looking for a title for that, I didn't want it to be called Untitled. It was very, I didn't really know what to title it. I didn't want it to be untitled. Untitled has its own, I think, could be used more cleverly than that. So I kind of didn't know what to call it, but also there's a lot of things that I don't know. And it's kind of like an empty void where a lot of these other ones, I was working from an idea already. I kind of just made this and then it happened to be there. And I really do enjoy looking at it, and I like to have different conversations about, oh, is this a portal into the ideas? Why is there a square with a circle, with a square on a square, and all those different relationships, and what does that say about things with? And I think it really is the most basic form of a lot of the work that I'm doing, to say, looking at it from a purely constructive or material aspect that comes with it. So the next one is called Bloody Point. And that's a direct reference to St. Kitts, the massacre of the Klingo Indians. I believe that's correct. And just thinking about personally the idea of blood and bloodshed, and how where I know as home, or my dad knew as home, well, someone else, that land was taken from someone else, and I have a very strong idea of what it is, or I have a very strong attachment to it, but that my family was brought there and the original inhabitants were killed off. So kind of like masking this beauty, because underneath all the red is a nice blue and a nice green piece. And I kind of want to just drown that out with that and really like bring that to the foreground and hide with the normal beauty that you see behind it. And then I guess because we've talked about Cruel Paradise and we've talked about Being Becoming, and then we'll do Last Stop #1, which is in conversation with Last Stop #2. I felt like I just did the same piece in a different way, but it doesn't have that calypso element where I wasn't That's purely just that talking about the last stop being the islands or the end of the sugarcane production in St. Kitts.
Well, interestingly enough, like the more that I look at everything, like the more I do see faces. I see faces, yeah, like headdresses, masks. And then I was like noticing like every single, piece has like some kind of like restraint, right? So there's something like across it, or that it's almost like crisscross, like, bars or something. Um, yeah, do you want to speak to that?
I think this idea of like constraint and like crisscrossing, the
Mm-hmm.
way I was reading it was different timelines intersecting.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the different timelines intersect is creating this whole narrative,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the way we look at history is very
Right,
linear. It's a
right,
straight line, but
right,
history doesn't happen like that. It's a lot of intersections. So I
right,
felt that weaving and crisscrossing, especially with the circle, I think history is more circular, more cyclical than a linear straight line.
right.
So but we can't interpret, we don't understand history like that. It's very difficult for us to understand that.
Right. Yeah, no, I've
So
written about that, and I think that it kind of like doesn't prepare people for the long haul. You know
mhm,
what I mean? Like, a lot of activism and stuff like that. Like we're in this instant culture, so we
mhm,
think, we think freedom is like, south to north. It
mhm.
is like that one straight line,
Yeah.
or that it's, instant clap, woo, the lights are on. But so it doesn't prepare people for the work. You know what I mean? The
Yeah.
long, the long haul. So yeah, I've written about that. Yeah. Hmm.
Sorry.
We
Um,
have a
but
gap.
yeah, but I guess going back on that, saying that when it came to when, like you were saying, like people aren't prepared, and we think that very straightforward nature.
Hmm.
I needed to be as inclusive to the narrative as possible, because if I were to say, let me try to tell this story as straightforward as possible, I felt like I would have told it in a very male heteronormative way. And I don't necessarily want to do that. I'm trying to kind of like, I don't need you to know that a man or a woman made this, or by certain brushstrokes or certain sensibilities when you look at a figure. So I wanted the crisscrossing of the different bands to be more representative of the different timelines, and to take into account a lot of narratives that people often don't get told, or they're left out, and say, no, no, they're also important. They make up this beautiful shape in the end. This is how we get here.
Right. And is there a particular writer that you like, or that
Um,
speaks to you?
I've been reading Michelle N. Wright's book, The Physics of Blackness,
Hmm.
The Middle Passage Epistemology, and I think that's been really informative to where I was, because I think she was the first person that pointed out this linear timeline of history, and saying, no, 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 it's not just that. Like, we all know that history isn't just one straight line, but we don't think about that. And then, but we need that for us to understand. We're not capable of thinking of it in all these intersecting ways. So I think that's been really, really important to understanding. And then also listening to certain like underground, I'll say underground because they have a following, but different underground rappers, and hip hop artists that are more of like the intellectual type, that are pulling from references from Kant and Nietzsche and W.E.B. Du Bois, and they're pulling in all these different literary and artistic references into their music, and they're also making me think a little bit more and going a little bit deeper than just this straightforward, let me serve it to you on a plate.
Well, and then also it makes me think about mapping, and that each of these could be maps in a certain way, mapping one's identity. Yeah, because there was something else that I was thinking about, and that I've also written about, which is the idea that we somehow, when we left like Africa or whatever, like we're no longer part of that history, like so that history is broken up so geographically, but that's not how we live, right? We are these intersecting beings, right? And so that's like that's another kind of like falsehood, right? The way that the maps have been broken up,
Right.
and it's just absolutely not true to who we are, you
Right.
know, and it's created all of these different kinds of schisms, you know. It's like, no, we are all interrelated. We are part of this place and this place and this place, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? So the idea of like Western history and then this history and then this history, it's, you know, it's problematic, you know, it's just as problematic as this linear kind of history telling, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, like, I mean, these could be maps as well, you know? And then I'm also thinking about like you know, and this is a stretch, but now I'm in the zone, right? But like thinking about you know, slavery and thinking about like people's hair and like and how maps were created in the hair and the patterns and stuff like that. And so, you know, looking at these works, there are all these different patterns and stuff like that. And it also reminds me of like messages kind of like embedded in people's hair, you know. Um, so yeah, so okay, so I think we should like wrap up. So what do you want people to know about your work? You know, I mean, personally, I think it's like really beautiful. I think that you're an exciting person on the scene. I can't wait to see where you go. Um, but what do you want people to know? What do you want to leave them with?
Um, I really sometimes I don't know. I kind of am just putting myself out there, and in a way, I want this to be almost an invitation for certain people to think about all of the different ways that created who they were as well. Where in my work, I'm kind of just sharing my process of understanding who I've become. But in a way, I want to also inspire other people to think about, hey, how did I get to here? What are these different interrelated elements? And so people know more about their past and they're more informed so that they're not uh, naive when they're making certain decisions, and then it's almost hypocritical. Like, why would you make this certain decision based off of where you've come from in that type of history? Um, and then I think also just I think having fun in making work doesn't have to be following the norms of art making, and yeah, just I'm thinking just having fun. That's the other thing. Just having fun and try to figure out where you came from. Yeah.
Great.
Well, I think it was amazing. I think we covered most of the stuff that we can possibly cover. And thank you so much for your time and your generosity, Pamela, for this talk. And thank you for your participation in this Beg Your Ghost exhibition one more time. And thank you, whoever who's watching this talk, for joining us. And I hope you guys can join us next time as well. Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Pamela.
All right.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Kyle.
Great.